We all know that effective internal communication is the secret to high-performing teams and companies. Did you know that according to a Tower Watson study, companies with effective employee communication tools see 47% higher total returns than businesses that communicate ineffectively? Beekeeper, a leader in employee communication, has developed an effective guide to help you understand your internal communications, especially if you work with a frontline team. Download Beekeeper's free guide today at www.beekeeper.io/crisis-averted-podcast. That's www.beekeeper.io/crisis-averted-podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Crisis Averted Podcast. I'm your host, CJ Arlotta. In this episode, I speak with Sean Worker and Glenn Haussman, authors of The Adapters. During our conversation, they share why it was necessary for them to write a book on how the travel, tourism, and hospitality industry is adapting and innovating to connect the world, some of the biggest takeaways from their interviews with Gutsy Genius Thinkers, more on that term later, and their thoughts on rethinking conventional thinking. Feel free to send me your feedback at cj@cjmediasolutionsllc.com. Don't forget, if you're listening to the Crisis Averted podcast on Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating, review, or both. I'd greatly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Glenn and Sean, thanks for coming on the Crisis Averted podcast today.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. Thanks, CJ.
Glenn, you're actually the first repeat guest on the podcast. Congratulations.
Well, thanks for allowing me back to make up for whatever mess we created last time. I appreciate it.
So for guys who, for everybody who's not familiar with Glenn and Sean, mind sharing a little bit about your backstory, guys, and what you're up to now? Glenn, let's start with you.
Yeah, I've been in the hospitality business for getting on 30 years now. Now, let's say 27. I don't want to go too crazy over there. And I've been a big, passionate spokesperson for our industry. And there's nothing I love better than seeing people find success in our business. And essentially, that's what my whole career is about.
Okay, Sean?
That's completely impressive, Glenn, just on every level. I don't know how I follow that. So, yeah, I've been around.
Sorry about that, Sean. We should let him go first. So that way I can try to one-up
big
him.
Bar, big bar. I've been in travel, tourism, and hospitality about the same length of time as Glenn. He's aged better, by the way.
Yeah, but you're much more successful, so it's
right. Okay, and so we, I'm from Ireland. Went to America, and then America's career for 20 plus years. Went over to the UK, ran businesses, including Wyndham's business outside the US, and then Bridge Street, ran that company for a while. Headed off to Barcelona, and here I am with Glenn with another episode of my career. So, what can I tell you? It's been an interesting road.
Well, great. Thank you guys for both coming on. I wanted to have you guys on to discuss the new book that you guys put together, The Adapters. Why did you start writing the book, and what were you hoping to achieve after it went to print?
Sean?
I think we really felt that the story of TTH, tourism, travel, and hospitality is largely not told in a long form. And it felt really the time. And this was pre-COVID, by the way. We started this in December of 2019.
Oh wow, it's a long time ago already.
It really is, isn't it? And
20 years ago.
And inevitably, this pandemic thing happened, and we wove the story in, but we didn't let it dominate. So this was really about capturing stories and interpreting the space, and bringing ideas and putting them in a simple format that people can use and hopefully get tips and takes and how to make the most out of their careers and learn from Gutsy Genius Thinkers.
Sean, why didn't you want the COVID-19 pandemic to dominate the book?
The tourism, travel, and hospitality space has done fairly well coming through plagues, wars, and this was another episode, and it would be just, as tragic as it is and as horrible as it is and as impactful as it is. We were very conscious about saying there is life after this, and there will be life after this, and we wanted to capture the stories of those that were getting through it as well as coming through it and seeing the light on the other side. And we kind of focused on the positive and the future rather than the episode that we've all lived through.
And also, CJ, this book is really about understanding adaptation and innovation and the characteristics and formulas that go into doing that. So to just dwell on one particular era of time isn't really the overall sense of the book. Instead, it was more of a launching pad for a lot of conversations about adaptation and innovation as opposed to being about COVID.
Now, how'd you guys go about selecting adapters for the book?
I think for me, it was mostly anyone who would return my phone call. I think is mostly people are just like, "What is this phone that you're using here?" We don't do that anymore. But we really, honestly, for the truth is, we really looked at people across the whole spectrum of businesses in travel, tourism, and hospitality that we thought best represented the qualities of Gutsy Genius Thinkers personality that we are really looking at that are helping drive that fourth age of change.
Yeah, and inevitably you get to talk to some incredible people, but this conscious effort of going horizontal versus following a vertical, like only hotels or only cruise ships, or there's an ecosystem that makes this sector, as other industries do, make it come alive. And those stories are largely untold, and more importantly, largely not connected in a way that is businesslike and meaningful, and you can get stuff from it. And that's what we wanted to do, but centering on adaptation and innovation in the space.
And CJ, what's really frustrating is all of these businesses are interlinked, but we treat them as almost wholly separate verticals. I mean, just look at what we see when it comes to the casino gaming business versus traditional hotels. They overlap in so many meaningful ways, but they're almost completely siloed off from each other. I mean, that's starting to change now with a lot of the major hotel brands going into the existing casino resorts as either a soft brand or an actual branded product. But you see this going across the whole strata of businesses. Nobody from the hospitality business on our hotel side seems to speak to anybody in cruises. And if I've seen a lot of designers go over to the cruise business, for example, and then they just completely vanish from our radar. So we're really hoping to bring all of these businesses more together in a more meaningful way to show how linked we really are.
Glenn, was that a conscious effort ahead of time when writing the book, or is that something that you kind of, found out while you were putting everything together?
Mostly a conscious effort. We really, really worked hard to do that because our natural inclination, CJ, was to continue to go back to what we always do and what we've always known, hotels. So it'd be like, I got this great person for an interview. And we're like, oh, we got too many of those types of people. And I'd be like, how about this person? And Sean is like, no, we got to go. And we got to go in this industry and that industry and think about it a different way. So that was really great for us to bring in other relationships that we have into our from our lives into this particular form and bring them all together in a wholly new way that's never been seen in our business before.
And then equally,
sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, CJ. You're ready to go.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and equally, it's hard putting out a book that's about adaptation and innovation unless you do it yourself. And this book was designed to be digital as well as analog. And so we were breaking new ground even in the publishing industry by having Apple and Google publish a highly interactive book. Equally, all of the interviews, and once you bought a book and you registered, you could listen to the long form by QR coding over to our anchor site, theadapters.net, and listening to the interviews and getting the color and texture of the GGTs. But about half the book is about the GGTs. The other part is about how to stitch together business process, emotional intelligence, and how to put strategy back into your business in a very simple, transformative way without getting overly academic. So it was very important for us to put a how next to a why with a destination. And that was super important to us.
And Sean, we'll talk a little bit later about the format of the book because it definitely is interesting. But going through this process and speaking with those adapters, what were some of the biggest takeaways for you?
So the adapters, I think there was a common thread where everybody's passionate about the space, and that's not unusual as a trait within this category. The other part is perpetual optimism. Even during the middle of this, the sense of humanity, Greg Jusium, as an example, caring deeply about the homeless situation and how they work through the G6 hospitality and contributing to local communities. That was an overwhelming and consistent theme, right, Glenn? We heard that a bunch of times.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that humanity aspect of it. And these were just real people. I think a lot of them are wired in a very particular positive way. So they always see the positive side of life, and it opens them up to be able to do things a little bit differently. And CJ, the thing that struck me most is these people know the art of critical thinking and really understanding how things change. Whereas most of society, and particularly in travel and tourism and hospitality, you seem to go and you go to a conference and you hear what CEOs say on stage, and then absolutely everybody seems to parrot back exactly that. But our gutsy genius thinkers, they don't do that. They think differently. They think on their own, and therefore are able to achieve because they go outside the spectrum of what's common into new and different areas of thought.
And crisis is, as Churchill said, you never waste a good crisis. So it's a great name of the show, right? Is that we had a big geographic spread, and there was as much discussion about where's the opportunity as there was tactics to survive and strategies to thrive. And that's the piece that's impactful. And equally, they were human enough that we went back to them and said, look, we interviewed you over the course of, call it 10 months or so. And we went back and we got about 80% of the GGTs to do a follow-up story with us, because one of the frustrations I think we all have are, as readers, is you tell the story like about CEOs and all these names that are household names, but you never find out actually what happened afterwards. Mm-hmm. It's kind of rosy. And so we went back afterwards, asked 5 questions of each of the GGTs that were consistent. And, many of them had predicted that COVID would, and COVID would end and be vaccinated by June and, last year. So that was wrong.
Well, but nonetheless, they were just off by a year, Sean, right?
They were just kind of off.
Right.
They were right with the first sentence, right, Glenn? So the impact of that was showing that it's okay to say, I didn't know, I did fail. Here's what I did about it. And to actually chronicle that, I think in our lead up, we think of ourselves as wanting to be anthropologists, tell the story as well as what happened and where it happened and how it happened, and so others can learn from it.
How did those interviews help you guys adapt over the past year?
Well, Glenn's IQ went up by 50 points. You should see him now.
I know. We're well into the 50s now for my overall IQ. So we're very proud around this house, and we're hoping to break 60 by the end of the year.
But, yeah, I'm jealous.
Yeah, this really followed a year. And I think, CJ, we talked about this on my last appearance about how I've been adapting and trying to innovate what I'm doing in my life throughout this. So going along my journey of adapting and changing the way that I operated my business and the way I wanted to be perceived within our community very much followed the line of what all of these people were doing. I'm speaking to all of these gutsy genius thinkers day after day after day for a couple of months. And they really helped, give me great ideas in the sense that I could rethink critical thinking. I should learn to trust my gut. I should be able to block out all of the din that is going around us and really focus on what's important. So I learned those lessons specifically from doing all of these 24 interviews or so that we facilitated.
CJ, I'm sure we've all gone through, I think, this sense of awareness, if you have the luxury to think. And, I feel very fortunate that this gave me a path to, as writing the book, that it forces you to, not alone just critical thinking, but immerse yourself in how people are feeling and bringing awareness to mindfulness and how this affected leadership. And then you compound that with the incredible pace of change with how they run their businesses or how we run our businesses, how we interact, how many podcasts have been started and failed.
Mine including.
You're actually successful because you're still at it, and that's the point. And everybody became a podcaster. Everybody wanted to communicate. So the speed at which we've learned new skills to communicate in this way, I hope that is not lost. And I think that is not lost on me in the sense of how that discipline of now taking those skills that you learned in an offline world, and now is the world that comes back onto online, hopefully we're not going to go back to where we were. In the book, we've encouraged people to look over the fence, look at others, look at other industries, and get inspiration. And that's applied to me personally with moving countries twice and during COVID, from Spain to Ireland, well, America to Spain, Spain to Ireland, as we explored our lives. But, not everybody has that luxury. And I think we're in for the next wave, which is an economic wave. And hopefully we'll learn from the crisis and apply skills that we probably up until this point hadn't discovered.
Yeah, and just going for me about the podcast, I've interviewed people before, but I never recorded a podcast or anything. In the beginning of the pandemic, I bought some equipment, started recording, had to learn how to edit everything, how to publish everything, how to get the artwork. And so, I've been doing it for over a year now, and it feels like I'm learning something new every day, buying, even better equipment. So I think a lot of people really went through that during that time period.
You bet, and congratulations to you for doing that.
Yeah, and if you want to get more equipment, I got a guy for you that could really help you through.
I'm sure you do.
So let me know. But you know what, CJ, you should be commended because you started out on a journey to reinvent yourself, right? You've been adapting, you've been innovating. You were a hospitality journalist that's gone over to doing public relations work, and creating this show and sticking with it says so much. As Sean was saying earlier, we saw an influx of people creating content, in particular from March through July of 2020 when we were all trapped in our houses. But a lot of those people just did not stick with it. And the people that stick with things, the people that are able to get past adversity, get past the challenges of having to do things over and over and over and over and over again until they find success, those are the ones that have more opportunities that seem to drop in their laps over time because they continue to put in the hard work even when it gets really super tough. And Sean, you know how hard this whole project was, much tougher than we even believed. If we had known at the onset of how difficult it would be to put all this together, I'm not sure I would have been able to get it done.
It's hundreds of hours. Right. But also the upside about all that is that it allows you to develop stamina. And that's probably a key attribute in coming out of this, is having the stamina and having the fortitude to focus, and in a very unfocused time. Mm-hmm. And so as much as hard work as it is and continues to be, because we continue to tell the story of the adapters and the innovators on adapters.net and Take 5 and all the stuff that Glenn's doing at No Vacancy. And so now this is, part of our routine. And there's a discipline to this, as you know, getting deadlines out there, putting content together, getting feedback all the time, listening to it. And sometimes it hurts your feelings, but that's exactly where you should be getting this constant loop of feedback. And I think a lot of the business leaders we interviewed, and then as we opined on the latter half of the book about how to use some of this, is it's a massive growth spurt. I mean, it's 10 years of change in 10 months. And that's not the pace that humanity likes to run at. And so, this is actually going to be a fascinating next, let's call it wave or chapter or episode in the tragedy, as we look at the next 24 months, where there will be even more amazing developments occur that we intend chronicling and documenting.
What's the story behind the term Gutsy Genius Thinkers, the GGTs you guys have been talking about?
Sean, that's yours.
So, first of all, we wanted something that caught your attention. I'm glad you asked that question. So that's great. That's one thing that worked, Glenn. See, there you go.
I know, right?
It's one thing. So,
check.
Sometimes it's about having guts, and that is intuitive. I mean, it's also, it's not linear, and everybody in their own right is a genius, and the ones that think have the energy and the fortitude to put something together. And I think without question, the GGTs and the future GGTs that we'll talk to, they're not scared to offer up their opinion. And leadership roles are lonely places. So you've got to have guts to want to take on leadership roles. And I'm not talking about CEOs. I'm not talking about COOs and the C-suites. The moment you step into a supervisor's job, it becomes lonely. You were part of the team. You're still part of the team, but now you're different. Then you become a manager and a director and a VP and a senior VP. And you crawl up the career ladder. But it takes, strength to do that, because these are islands. And we find that these gutsy genius thinkers across multiple different disciplines, from being investment bankers to entrepreneurs to career professionals, all have a common trait, and they've got their own guts in their own way, and they think in their own way, and that autonomy is what makes the world go round. It's the energy that drives us.
Right. And CJ, being a gutsy genius thinker means, not necessarily listening to what everybody says, but then drawing your own conclusions and not allowing outside influences to affect what you need to do in order to affect change and find success.
That's an effective leader.
And leadership is as malleable and as fluid as Jell-O, and it changes. And that's the piece that for all of us that have run businesses or been involved as a leader, is that just when you think you got it, you don't have it. I mean, whatever you thought going into COVID, were you ready? It showed all of our vulnerabilities, whether you had a tech backup, you had a sales backup strategy, or more importantly, how you adapted. And that's the leadership. When you look at some of the stories we've covered subsequently with ghost kitchens and how that has emerged into the next Uber, if you will, of restaurant brands without a restaurant that are delivering and super successful with incredible margins. The adaptability of the restaurant groups generally, I think, is impressive. And then you look at how the airlines are taking out all the business seats for the most part, like JetBlue, what they did with Mint. And you go through each one of the industries, you start to see the ones that had the fortitude to aggregate their thinking, but more importantly, aggregate their teams to come up with, we've got to solve this problem. And that's really what leadership is getting others together to solve problems and then make something of it.
Sean, what were some of the top problems or the things that kept a lot of these leaders up at night?
So, I think you'll hear a lot of people say that there's not much keeps you up at night because you're too tired after a long fight. So, yeah. What's top of mind is it depends, right? It depends on where you are. If you're a tech business and not all tech businesses were successful, let's call it online retail, or you take delivery. Their issue was scalability. How to get that many people to do that many things globally and mobilize systems and integrate systems and stand up technology and hire and, grocery stores on a very analog level, hired tens of thousands of new people to do new things that were coming from industries that they would never typically hire from. The other part then, at the early onset was about cash flow management. I mean, it wasn't about brand or anything. It was surviving till tomorrow. And the stress that goes with that as you go into fundraising, or you're negotiating with landlords, or you're negotiating with your banks to get to tomorrow. And, you could keep going through that list. I know Glenn will have some examples as well that stood out for him in these conversations. And that's what keeps people going, because they want to get to tomorrow. And the other part that was very clear was the sense of, as we all have who have led through crisis of one type or another, you care about your people first, your family, your friends, your teammates, to get them through tomorrow, because you have this immense responsibility that you feel where, if we don't keep going, mortgages aren't going to get paid, kids aren't going to go to school. At some amazing level, people won't eat. And so that sense of honor and that sense of fortitude and that sense of leadership came through a lot, not just with the GGTs, but a lot of the other leaders we engage with. I mean, Glenn, what was your perspective?
I agree with everything that you've been saying, and it's really interesting to me that go back to that word guts that people have to be able to take chances that can have an adverse effect on their lives, their lifestyles, how they're perceived in their culture, all of that kind of stuff. So it's pretty awesome. I love how Koch Noon. She's a professor, and I loved how she was completely thinking differently, Sean, about what their role should be as an educational facility. Really understanding that technology changes are going to really potentially up and change everything the way that we learn. And she was trying to get ahead of that. And what do you know? A lot of that has already started to happen. And also, I loved how Mitch. I'm completely blanking on his name right now. Presnick, right? Mitch Presnick went into China and managed to bring a hotel brand there and get over 1,000 properties in China as an American. And what we really learned about is with him was so interesting, CJ, because he went to an entirely, not just a different culture, but almost an entirely different universe, because going to China is very different than American going somewhere in Europe, for example. So he really learned a lot of valuable lessons on how to affect change within an existing system and find success where the rules there are very, very specific and solid. Yet he managed to find a way. That's the kind of stuff that I absolutely love.
Yeah, James Blick and Yali Martin.
We could go on and on and
on. In Spain, where they had a very successful tour business and, personalized tours, doing exceptionally well, big YouTube stars, and their business collapsed. So what did they start doing? They started doing pivoted, adapted, became spokespeople for hotels and other products that were enabling themselves to come back in different ways, and start going around and getting sponsored ads and sponsors for thought leadership pieces that they would ordinarily have not done, and been part of the movement of regenerative cities, which is a big issue in many cities, particularly in Europe. When you think of the impact of cruises and tourists. And I think those cities have now learned that tourism is a critical element and a cornerstone of how the locals live and thrive. So it's people doing real things, but impacting in a very large way, as Glenn was saying. And I think the other part that we enjoyed was, as you dig and go around a couple of rings out from the center, and you see and connect the dots between tourism and regeneration of cities. Venice is the poster child. It's sinking. Well, you kind of need to manage that in a way that probably was the other end of the spectrum. Too many. But you still need the tourists, because that what brings in a lot of energy, but also brings in a lot of money into the market that drives and protects the city and enables them to build the defenses to stop sinking. And so it's this interconnected and woven society that became very apparent to us, and we continue to tell those stories.
I did notice you also got to interview Leonardo da Vinci and Benjamin Franklin for the book. How did you get that set up?
Well, Ben and Leonardo, and they're both colorful characters, and they are founders, and they are gutsy genius thinkers, and they were a little occasionally quiet, hard to get, but we eventually got them, which was good. Ben was more forthcoming than Leonardo, but I think more is the point. Why are they in the book? Yeah, well, They're in the book because we also want our own GGTs and all the readers to say, look, this has been going on for a long time.
Yeah.
This has gone back on centuries and centuries before that. And this too shall enable us to do amazing things that we're discovering now. And they are both polymaths. They are both have a lot in common, although centuries apart. Engineers, mathematicians, writers. It's hard to find people like that these days. And so it's also about inspiring our readers to look back to see what the future looks like, because then you can look even more forward and say, this is a journey. And I think that's why we put them in there.
And Sean, you mentioned earlier about the formatting of the book, how different it is. You want to talk a little bit about that, because it's fun. There's a lot in there. I believe there are sections that, people can journal in there as well. Talk a little bit about how you went about developing the format.
Well, when we talked about the format, we put down the list of all the stuffs that we don't like, and all the, I don't even know how many books I've read, and Glenn is the same way. And so we jotted down a list. And first of all, we wanted the book to be about others. And how do you tell that? The other part is when you're telling these stories, oftentimes people's images aren't in the book. So we wanted to make sure they're images, so you could put a name and a face together and hopefully inspire you to go and check these people out. The other part was make it easy to learn on a platform. And another frustration with books is put in all the hyperlinks. Show me where your source material is and make it easy for me to use it and find it so it's credible. Obviously, we were writing this in the middle of the alleged fake news cycle, and we felt it important to be able to support our theories and other collateral that went in to make this a story. And then equally, we wanted, if you preferred the analog version, well, then you can take your camera and on your phone and hyperlink to listen to Koch or Mitch or Cindy or any one of the GGTs and go listen to them, because you're going to get a lot out of that too. And then what was important along the way is tips and takes and scribble zones, so that I like to scribble on books as you go, but then it eventually gets lost. And certainly in the digital version, we worked with Apple and Google and our publisher, and apparently it's not normal to do. And we got them to agree to formatting the book so that you could actually take on your tablet, take a pen, scribble in there, extract it, and then hopefully use it, because we want this to be used. And the other byproduct, which we probably didn't think of, was the fact that now that the market is asking us to come and speak and join at conferences, I mean, it's a very easy way to have the audience participate. So it's another level of learning and engagement. And when you write something down, you have a tendency to remember it. And so that all of those elements went into make it useful, tips and takes and ideas and how this is applicable, not just dump it and then run. And we felt that was important.
And you guys, it's really not just a book. I mean, you have an entire platform now, right? You have you have a podcast, videos. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll throw in my thoughts on that. We're trying to reinvent everything, and now is the opportunity to rethink conventional thinking. That's kind of a mantra of mine throughout my entire career. And when it came to doing this book, Sean had that incredible idea of doing the QR codes and stuff like that. And us creating this platform really allows us to present all of these interviews in the way that people want to digest them, either in small snippets from the books, or they can have the entire interviews at their disposal. But it's more than that. It's also a continuing series of interviews, because inspiration, innovation, none of that stands still. So neither can our website. We're not about capturing a moment in time. We're about following a journey as we all go along and learn how to learn, adapt, and innovate in our own lives. So Sean and I are putting out short form videos called Take 5 every single week, where we take an issue that we see out there in the news, discuss that adaptation, that innovation that we're seeing, and then analyze it and include our takeaway points for how that is relevant to what's going on in the business community and hopefully your lives and your careers.
And where can people purchase the book?
John?
Well, there's 39,000 outlets, but people seem only to know one, which is Amazon. And in any country you can think of, and anywhere in the world with book repository that deliver anywhere in the world. So we know that it's been purchased all over the place. So people are finding it, which is great. Thank you for asking.
Thank you guys for coming on the podcast today. I really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you both soon.
Thanks.
Hey, appreciate it.